Doctor, now, she spoke about just before the break. You're saying that the digital economy, or perhaps the growth that we've seen, even across Africa, excluding Nigeria right now, is also coming from the growth or access to mobile phones. We are seeing what is happening in Kenya, for example. I mentioned before the break, M-Pesa, for example, mobile money, driven by Safaricom and all of that. But it's still not, it hasn't caught up with us, really, here in Nigeria. Why do you think so?
I think there were a number of policy issues that are responsible for that. So rather than drive inclusion through the telecommunication companies, for instance, we insisted on driving it through the banks. And like you said, a number of people are unbanked at the moment. But I'm glad that we've now come full circle. We had both the NCC and the central bank with us yesterday at the event that we had. And there's now a clear understanding that we need to leverage more on access to mobile phones rather than trying to do everything through the banks.
Now, let me ask Brigit, because you're also a proponent of this digital economy.
Absolutely.
Do you think that that is the total solution? Or are there also some risks that are involved, some underlying risk?
Absolutely. Okay, so first of all, no, I don't think it's the total solution, but it is a big part of the solution. And sure, there are risks. So when people start to participate in the digital economy, that means that your data becomes available, you become visible, there's more transparency, that's a positive side, right? So from a governance perspective, for instance, affecting government payments or salary payments for teachers or different types of transactions that happen with government, that can add a lot of transparency, which is of course a good idea for any country. But on the other hand, that means your data is out there. Who's going to use that data? What is it for? What are the data protection measures that are being taken, which I understand actually there are a number of data protection measures that are being taken by the government here, which is a good sign. On the other hand, what's happened, for instance, in Kenya, now that you have those rails, there are a number of lenders on top of those rails that some people are concerned about. It's a high cost of lending, very fast turnaround kind of money that could end up in over-indebtedness of individuals, because easy money, So what that calls into question is the need for financial literacy and helping people and consumer protection measures that help people understand what it is they're getting into and protecting them against potential abuses of the system. So it's a next level type of problem that you would have, but then you have to ask, the costs and benefits here. There's so many benefits that are also brought to individuals, households, and small businesses by being connected. So I think, as with everything, you have to balance the pros and cons.
Doctor, you want to say something, or should I just shoot my question from what she's actually she said about financial literacy? And that brings me to the question of education, which you mentioned earlier in passing. And the question will be, do you think that even as Nigerians, that we're getting the right kind of education? Because if you take a look at, if you want to build an inclusive economic system, I think part of that architecture should also be, how are your citizens educated? What are they getting? Or if they leave whatever, whether the technical schools, which we really do not have anymore, or I don't know what they're doing, the university system and all of that. What is the right kind of education? You even see a Nigerian graduate is not a financial literate.
Interesting.
So somehow that person also you would not say that person is financially included. Totally. You understand what I mean?
I do understand what you mean,
Yeah.
but let me not limit it to the Nigerian graduate. The Nigerian postgraduate is also financially literate, like I am. But the
that's why it shows like this.
I think as an Igbo man, all I can do is count money. That's all I need to be able to do. But you raise a very important point about education generally, and it's about whether our education is targeted to the market and to real life, and in a lot of cases it isn't. And that's why for some time we've actually been thinking of supporting the idea of setting up a coding school in Nigeria, that because we have a vibrant youth population, we have a number of companies and industries that require highly skilled people. What people leave the universities with as an education isn't necessarily what the market requires. So we need to find a way to bridge that gap between paper education and the skills that the market requires. But in addition to that, I think the financial sector needs to do a lot more to educate people. There is this thing in Nigeria that if you don't talk jargon, then you're not smart. Whereas actually it's more difficult to talk in plain language. So it actually takes more intelligence and intellect to explain things easily in a way that people would understand it. So you watch a number of shows, including yours, where people simply talk about things that, terms that the average citizen doesn't relate to. But I'm sure the average citizen can relate to how their money is managed, where they should put it, and for it to grow, the risks that they have when they put the information out. So I think we can all do a lot more to improve that financial education.
Doctor, I try my best to.
I know you do.
I try to break this show down for everyone to understand. So it's not just for elites. It's also for the woman in Wuse or Balogun market to understand what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Now, as we're talking about even in economic inclusion and all of that, I also understand that we have the role, you've talked about even financial, that's people within the financial landscape and all of that. We know that a lot of people are also interested, perhaps even donor agencies, donor agencies interested in having, a vibrant economic system in Nigeria or perhaps the rest of Africa, for example, that will bring in that financial inclusion. DI is also doing quite a lot, I'm aware, isn't it? How do you think that, you call them funders in your book?
Yes. There's a chapter on funders, that's right.
Funders.
Yeah.
How do you think that the engagement of funders should be moving forward?
Absolutely.
Because if you take a look at perhaps Africa or Nigeria, we should also look at the engagement of these funders. Should there be a change of engagement?
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah, I do believe that.
Yeah.
So this is a really important question, because I'm sure you're familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes.
Right. So these are 17 goals that were set out by the United Nations, and I've noticed that here in Nigeria, people talk about them a lot, which is great. So there was a committee, a business commission that was set up around the time of the Sustainable Development Goals, and they estimated that in order to actually fund these goals, there was a funding gap of about $2.5 trillion a year globally. The sort of the more concessional traditional donor funders and development finance institutions spend on the neighborhood of about 400 billion. And they're not going to reach the target. We're very far away from the target. So the only place to look is in the private sector, in the private finance, right? So I believe, and many people believe right now, that the highest and best use in many cases of the donor funding, the concessional funding, should be to kind of de-risk the investment opportunities on the ground and pull in the multiples of this larger pool of private money and direct it into sectors that are going to have a larger impact from the perspective of building inclusive economic systems. So I'm talking about health, education, energy, financial sector as well, of course, agriculture, water and sanitation, etc.
Now, for Doctor, if we take a look at the country, for example, I know DAI, or you told me that DAI operates in over 100 countries, for example. That means that DAI has experiences across the 100 countries, and there are some things that you would also bring to bear in Nigeria. But I also do know that is not one cap fits all for all the countries, especially for Nigeria, because they say Nigeria is a peculiar country. You see that things happen over in other countries. They'll say, oh, it cannot happen in Nigeria because Nigeria is peculiar. And I'm wondering what's peculiar about us. Are there some of those experiences that you can share, however, Nigerianizing those experiences, if I'm, yes, let me use that word, or Nigerianized models that can work?
Well, every country is peculiar. There's no country that isn't peculiar. And context matters, and that's why, like you quite rightly said, you know, one size doesn't fit all. You need to adapt it to the local context and the history, the politics, the social norms. If you don't do that, you simply get models that don't work. So yes, there have been a few things, and it's not a one-way stream. There are also a number of things that we've got to work in Nigeria that we're taking to other countries as well. So as an example, I've just been invited to Malawi to advise on a very, very successful local government administration program that we have in Malawi. So we've done quite a lot of work getting the local governments in Malawi to be vibrant and to deliver better services to more people. And they've been so successful that donors are fighting over each other to give them money to do more. And doing more means working at states or district and national level, which they don't have experience of doing. We have a lot of experience in Nigeria in working at state and federal government levels, but haven't done so well in local government. And so this is the kind of exchange that we do across our programs. I was in Morocco last month as well, where they had devolved more power to districts. And they were asking me to think about how they can get the districts to peer review each other without being imposed on by donors or by central government, which is something we've designed in Nigeria for the Nigerian Governors Forum, for the states to actually peer review each other. So we do those transfers of knowledge all the time. We've done quite a lot of work in other countries that we're using in Nigeria. The market systems approach we're using in the Niger Delta is something that we've used successfully in different parts of the world. The work we do on policy advice, because we have a program called the Policy Development Program that actually embeds DAI experts in the offices of ministers and also in the office of the Vice President, helping to shape policy from within government. And these are mostly Nigerians, but who have experience in other countries. And so that is us actually working at the front line with the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister for Health, Minister of Power Works and Housing, Trade and Investment, the Vice President's office himself, looking at things like how cash transfers have worked in other countries. So we've had a lot of experience in Brazil, Mexico, a few other places where we've, especially Brazil, where we've used cash transfers successfully. And so all of the initiatives, the social investment program run by the Office of the Vice President, we're again bringing all our knowledge to bear on that. So it's a symbiotic exchange, because DAI's purpose in life is building a more livable world. And so we take that symbiotic approach to ensure that we share all the knowledge and expertise that we have and try and raise the bar everywhere everywhere where we work.
Now, let me still stick with you for a bit, Dr. Abah. What do you think is the missing link again between action and impact? Why we've not been able to get so much impact from perhaps the so-called action of governments, in parentheses, over the years? Because right now, Nigeria is global headquarters of poverty, as it were, in terms of, you know, a lot of us are poor, not just even poor, extreme poverty is growing in the country despite what government is doing. The 5,000 naira CCT, they empower 30,000 naira to alleviate poverty, at least at that level, that those that don't get jobs, please come and teach and agree all of that. Within like 2 years or so, we give you 30,000 naira. Trader money to empower women, markets people, quite a whole lot of that. So what is that missing action? What is that missing link? That we're seeing this kind of actions, but yet we're still not having desired impact.
Again, like I said earlier, there are a number of structural issues that
so it's still with structure?
I think a lot of it is with structure. There are other issues, of course. I mean, like you said earlier, our economy is growing at about 1.5 to 1.8% annually. Our population is growing at 3%. And so it doesn't matter what initiative you bring up. It doesn't matter what infrastructure you build. By the time you complete it, it's already too small. And so, you know, these different initiatives you've talked about is a drop in the ocean. I mean, where our universities are churning out something like 500,000 graduates every year, and the economy is not creating jobs. That level of jobs. So that is one of the key problems. The other problems, of course, is that almost everything you've said has focused on what the federal government does, but we have 3 tiers of government. And so what are the state governments doing?
I was coming to that. In fact, that was my next question. That what do you think?
I can read your mind.
That was my next question, in the sense that what can states be doing, especially with the data? Sorry, Brigit, let me stick with him a bit. Especially with the data, yes, especially with the data of state unemployment that was just released by the NBS, telling us that a lot of states across Nigeria are suffering unemployment. In fact, a lot of them that are over 30% are in the Niger Delta region. So how do you now explain that, especially with the so-called actions that the state governments are putting out and even advertising on television, yet that impact is not there, or not as much as it should be?
Yes, I think part of the reason is that we tend not to focus on human development. We don't focus on issues of education, which would actually, you know, make people employable and make people employers. We don't focus on health, including advising people on family planning, because we can no longer skirt around the issue of family planning. We can't. So it's an issue we must tackle and we must address. The population growth is unsustainable given the level of economic growth that we have. But our populace is still such that if you want to win elections, all you need to do is build roads. That's all you need to do. You don't need to focus on schools, you don't need to focus on education, on health, you don't need to focus on anything else other than building roads. And so, you know, the politician looks at it and says, okay, you know, this is what they want, we'll give them roads, and nobody asks any other questions beyond that. So I think there's also, in terms of educating the populace, it's not only educating the populace about financial issues, it's also educating the populace about development issues, that no country develops without a viable education system. No country has developed in the last 50 years without a strong civil service. We can no longer treat our civil service as a nuisance that is just there to be tolerated. And in one breath, we will say the civil service is the engine of growth. In another breath, we'll say the private sector is the engine of growth. So unless we get the governance right, we will keep having ad hoc interventions, some funded by donors. But if you look at it in the grand scheme of things, all donor support that Nigeria gets, both in terms of grants and loans, is less than 1% of our gross national income. And so the thought really needs to be about how can we use our own resources better,
yeah.
how can we hold to account people that are responsible for managing our resources. You remember that even in the fallout of the recession, we did a bailout for a number of states where they had to agree to, I think, about 22 criteria.
About 23 criteria.
What has happened to those criteria?
Nothing really. They didn't even want to call it fiscal sustainability plan, but a lot of them did not even meet that criteria and all of that. All right, let me come back to you, Brigit. In all of this, in all your experiences, what do you think that Africa should do? As Africa is the youthful population. Africa has a youthful. Africa is a continent of the youth.
It is.
Yeah.
Which you could argue it makes it the continent of tomorrow, right?
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, that's true.
In some ways, because it is, some of other parts of the world, it's an aging population that's no longer productive and will never be. So I think it's really about finding increasing ways to make essentially what is gig economy that already exists in Africa. The informal sector is the main driver of employment and income in Africa. I think the idea that everyone's going to get a formal sector job with all of the requisite sort of benefits and things like that is just a dream, at least for the foreseeable future. So how can we use technology and other kinds of inputs to help make those kind of gig economy jobs, or people who are doing multiple jobs, which is many people on the continent, more productive and higher quality, so that they can, make more money and also have a higher quality life and more also safety nets. So I think the issue for me about government and government policy is about making sure that there's a baseline, a safety net to not let people fall through there, but then figuring out how to encourage investment in the right kind of sectors that are going to enable more growth into the future.
Okay, I'll stick with you.